Marilyn Monroe was not born Marilyn Monroe. She entered the world on June 1, 1926, as Norma Jean Mortensen, later baptized as Norma Jean Baker. The modest apartment in Los Angeles, where she took her first breath, was crowded, noisy, and filled with the instability that would haunt her for decades. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, struggled with mental illness and poverty, and Norma Jean's father was absent, a shadowy figure whose presence, or lack thereof, left a void she could never quite fill. From the very start, life demanded resilience from this tiny, fragile child. Her earliest memories were punctuated by foster homes, orphanages, and the occasional brief return to her mother's care. By the time she was 6, she had already learned that permanence was a luxury she could not rely upon. Each new home brought different rules, new faces, and the unspoken question, "Am I wanted here?" It was this uncertainty that would later seep into every facet of her adult life, her relationships, her career, and the very way she presented herself to the world. Even as a child, Norma Jean possessed an unusual light. Neighbors and teachers noted her bright blue eyes, her almost ethereal blonde hair, and the quick smile that could warm a room. But behind the charm lurked an acute awareness of her fragility. She understood, even at an early age, that to survive in a world that often seemed indifferent, she had to make herself seen. Appearance became armor, and personality became a tool. In the shadow of abandonment, she began shaping the version of herself that could endure, though she would not yet know it. Her first brushes with the adult world came through work and necessity rather than carefree childhood exploration. By age 16, she was married, not for love, but as a practical solution to escape the foster system. Her union to James Doherty, a kind but ordinary young man, offered her stability and the illusion of safety. Yet Norma Jean was restless. She had glimpsed the Hollywood skyline from afar and imagined a life that sparkled with possibility, a life that seemed entirely out of reach from the modest neighborhoods she had known. It was in those formative years, moving from home to home and eventually into her own adult life, that Norma Jean began to develop a secret understanding of performance. She learned to mask fear with humor, vulnerability with flirtation, and doubt with charm. Each role she assumed, whether in a classroom, a small part-time job, or as a young bride, was practice for the ultimate performance that awaited her, Hollywood itself. This instinct for reinvention was both survival and prelude. Her entry into modeling came almost by accident. While working in a factory during World War II, Norma Jean's photograph was taken for an in-house newsletter. The image caught the eye of photographers outside the assembly line, who recognized her photogenic qualities and encouraged her to pursue modeling. It was a chance that seemed almost fated, a glimpse of stardom shining through the cracks of a life defined by uncertainty. For Norma Jean, it was validation. She was not just a girl moving from one foster home to another. She was someone the world could stop and notice. By 1945, she had begun to sign small contracts with film studios, dabbling in bit parts that often went uncredited. The experience was grueling. Long hours, strict studio rules, and an unrelenting hierarchy exposed her to a side of Hollywood that was cold, calculating, and often dismissive. She was reminded that beauty alone could open doors, but respect, longevity, and security required much more. Yet Norma Jean's early brush with fame also revealed her capacity for patience and observation. She learned the art of reading people, understanding their ambitions, and recognizing opportunity when it appeared disguised as routine. The name Marilyn Monroe had not yet been born, but the seeds were already planted. In a Los Angeles studio, surrounded by technicians, lighting rigs, and the smell of fresh paint and chemicals, Norma Jean began practicing the persona that would one day captivate the world. She experimented with voice, posture, and expression, slowly learning to manipulate not only the camera, but also the invisible gaze of the public. Every smile, every tilt of the head, every glance toward the lens was a rehearsal for a future stage far larger than the studio itself. Yet behind the experimentation and early successes, there was always the lingering fear of rejection and invisibility. The young Norma Jean could not forget the years of uncertainty, the nights spent wondering where she would sleep, and the afternoons wishing her mother could simply stay well enough to be present. That pain became a quiet driving force, a tension between vulnerability and ambition that would follow her into every studio, every audition, and every glamorous photo shoot. In many ways, it was the shadow of her childhood that carved the brilliance of her future. Even at this early stage, those who knew her reported an almost magnetic combination of fragility and determination. She was approachable, with laughter that seemed to light rooms, but she also carried a subtle, almost imperceptible steeliness, an instinct to survive in a world that often demanded more than it offered. Each step toward her career was calculated, even when it appeared spontaneous. In private, she practiced lines, expressions, and postures, perfecting the duality that would become Marilyn Monroe, the persona of light, charm, and joy layered over a core of complexity and pain. By the time she was 18, Norma Jean had experienced more uncertainty than most adults endure in a lifetime. But she also carried with her the tools to transform adversity into opportunity. Her first professional modeling contracts, her initial forays into minor film roles, and her growing awareness of her own appeal all hinted at a potential that Hollywood would soon exploit and the public would idolize. What began as survival in foster homes had transformed into the foundational skills of a performer, someone who could command attention, manipulate perception, and turn every moment into art. Her childhood was not merely a prelude to fame, it was the lens through which every choice, every relationship, and every performance would be filtered. Marilyn Monroe would always be, in part, a product of those early shadows, glittering and luminous on the surface, yet defined by the insecurities and desires that had followed her from foster homes to movie sets. The world would see the blonde bombshell, the icon of beauty and sensuality, but beneath the surface, the fragile child who had learned to survive through transformation remained quietly present, shaping every smile, every laugh, and every sigh. In these earliest years, Norma Jean Baker learned the most important lesson she would carry into stardom. Survival requires both visibility and concealment. To shine, she would have to reveal herself to the world, yet always shield the parts that hurt the most. The dichotomy of public adoration and private vulnerability, the tension between image and reality, was already forming, a paradox that would define her life and ultimately her tragic legacy. By the mid-1940s, Norma Jean Baker had begun to glimpse a world far beyond the cramped apartments and transient foster homes of her childhood. Los Angeles pulsed with possibility, a city in the midst of post-war transformation, with Hollywood at its epicenter. The film industry, hungry for fresh faces to fuel the studio system, was a glittering stage that promised escape, fame, and fortune, but it came with rules that could crush the unwary. For Norma Jean, it was both a sanctuary and a battlefield. Her entry into modeling had been modest, but it opened doors that previously seemed sealed. A factory photograph had caught the attention of a local photographer who introduced her to commercial shoots for calendars, advertisements, and pin-ups. By the time she was 17, Norma Jean was appearing in magazine spreads that showcased her luminous skin, blonde hair, and striking smile. Yet she was not content with mere images. She wanted to move, to perform, to inhabit the stories that Hollywood projected on its silver screens. In 1946, she signed a short-term contract with 20th Century Fox, marking her first step into the studio system. The arrangement was unglamorous, small, often uncredited roles in films like Dangerous Years and Scudder Hay offered minimal pay and grueling schedules. Yet Norma Jean approached these roles with a seriousness that set her apart from other young hopefuls. She studied the nuances of camera angles, lighting, and timing, absorbing lessons that would later inform her on-screen magnetism. Every minor part became a masterclass in performance, and every director, cinematographer, or co-star a teacher in the art of self-presentation. Behind the scenes, the studio system demanded obedience. Young actresses were closely monitored, molded into marketable images, and trained to accept that their personal lives were secondary to the brand being cultivated. Norma Jean quickly learned the duality required of her, public compliance paired with private strategy. She observed the fates of other actresses who had stumbled under similar pressures, recognizing that survival demanded not only talent, but foresight and adaptability. It was during this time that she began understanding the unspoken rules of Hollywood, a society where beauty was currency and vulnerability could be fatal. Her early experiences with casting directors and agents were both illuminating and brutal. While some saw her potential, others dismissed her as a pretty face lacking substance. These judgments stung, but they also sparked a determination to control her own trajectory. She started experimenting with her hair, her wardrobe, and even her speech. The year was 1946, and Norma Jean Baker was at a crossroads. She had experienced enough of Hollywood's backstage lessons to understand one immutable truth: talent alone was not enough. In a system obsessed with image, the right name, the right look, the right persona could open doors talent never could. It was a lesson she would take to heart. Slowly, deliberately, Norma Jean began the most audacious transformation of her life, the reinvention that would make her Marilyn Monroe. The decision to change her name was far from trivial. Marilyn came from Marilyn Miller, a Broadway star admired for her charisma and beauty, a symbol of stardom Norma Jean wanted to emulate. Monroe was her mother's maiden name, a tenuous link to her biological heritage, and perhaps a quiet tribute to the woman whose absence had shaped so much of her early life. Together, the new name represented both aspiration and reclamation, a careful construction that would become one of the most famous in the world. But a name alone was not enough. Monroe's physical transformation was painstaking. She altered her hair, perfecting the platinum blonde look that would become her trademark. Weight management, posture, and makeup were all meticulously honed, each choice calculated to maximize camera appeal. Yet beneath the surface, the transformation was psychological as well. Norma Jean consciously crafted a persona, part innocence, part seduction, part vulnerability, that could captivate audiences while shielding the fragile self beneath. Marilyn Monroe was, in essence, armor and performance intertwined. Early publicity photos from this period reveal the meticulous care with which she approached her image. Every tilt of the head, every playful glance, every subtle smile was a study in control. Studio photographers, initially skeptical, soon recognized her instinctive understanding of the camera. Monroe had a natural ability to convey narrative without words, to tell stories of longing, charm, or mischief with a glance alone. It was this skill, more than any particular line or gesture, that would make her unforgettable. Her reinvention also involved learning the art of allure without offense, a delicate balancing act in 1940s Hollywood. She was young, attractive, and aware of her power, yet she had to navigate the fine line between being desirable and being typecast. Directors and producers often sought actresses who could embody a caricature of beauty without overshadowing male leads. Monroe, however, began to demonstrate that she could do both, captivate audiences while quietly asserting her intelligence, timing, and professionalism. This subtlety would become one of her signature traits. The shift from Norma Jean to Marilyn was not instantaneous. It was a process that took years of experimentation, failure, and observation. She studied established stars, Ginger Rogers, Jean Harlow, Carole Lombard, analyzing how they combined charm with craft. She mimicked, adapted, and then refined, creating a style that was uniquely hers. In the private spaces of her dressing room, she rehearsed expressions, voice inflections, and gestures, perfecting a blend of vulnerability and confidence that could be deployed at will. It was performance layered on performance, an intricate act that few outside the studio would ever glimpse. Marilyn's early attempts to break into substantive roles reflected both ambition and awareness of her limitations. Small appearances in films like Ladies of the Chorus gave her the chance to test her persona against the demands of acting. Critics were mixed, but Monroe was undeterred. She recognized that Hollywood often dismissed emerging talent until it could no longer ignore the magnetic pull of presence and charm. In private, she worked tirelessly with coaches, practicing lines, emotion, and timing until she could match the demands of the camera. By 1948, the transformation was becoming public. Monroe's image, carefully curated in headshots and magazine spreads, was beginning to generate attention. Modeling work, film contracts, and publicity appearances combined to establish her presence in Hollywood circles, yet she remained aware of the gap between perception and reality. Monroe's persona was a shield, protecting her from the insecurity and self-doubt that had been cultivated during her childhood. It was a dual existence: public Marilyn, luminous and charming; private Norma Jean, vulnerable and searching for stability. The challenge of reinvention extended beyond looks and mannerisms. Monroe also began shaping her reputation, understanding that Hollywood was as much about narrative as it was about talent. Stories about her charm, generosity, and playful innocence were circulated strategically, ensuring that the public would associate her not just with beauty, but with a persona that seemed effortlessly captivating. She learned the mechanics of celebrity, the interplay between image, press, and perception, a skill that few stars of her age truly mastered. This period also highlighted the tension between control and dependency. While Monroe carefully constructed her public image, she remained tied to the whims of studio contracts and the subjective opinions of executives. Her early mentors encouraged her, but they also reminded her that Hollywood was a machine that could discard its stars without notice. The stakes were high, and the consequences of failure were often invisible until they had already occurred. For Monroe, this knowledge intensified both her discipline and her anxiety. Socially, Monroe began to navigate Hollywood's elite networks, meeting actors, producers, and directors who could shape her career trajectory. She observed their behaviors, studied their choices, and internalized lessons about influence and negotiation. Even casual encounters became exercises in understanding power dynamics, learning who could help and who might hinder. The young actress realized that mastery of image had to be paired with mastery of relationships, a combination that would serve her well in the coming decade. Perhaps most crucially, the reinvention allowed Monroe to harness the pain of her past as fuel for her artistry. Experiences of abandonment, instability, and insecurity, once sources of vulnerability, were now subtly integrated into her performances. The tension between longing and charm, innocence and seduction, became her signature. Audiences, sensing authenticity behind the crafted persona, responded with fascination and devotion. Monroe's early understanding of this interplay between life and performance set her apart from peers, hinting at the icon she would become. By the end of the 1940s, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just Norma Jean Baker. She was emerging as a carefully calibrated phenomenon, blending allure, intelligence, and emotional resonance. Studios began to recognize her star potential, offering slightly larger roles, more prominent publicity opportunities, and a growing fan base. But Monroe understood that the transformation was never complete. It required constant attention, adaptation, and vigilance. Every public appearance, every photograph, every film performance was another layer of construction, another chance to refine the persona that had been born from necessity and ambition. The reinvention of Norma Jean into Marilyn Monroe was more than a career strategy. It was a survival mechanism, an assertion of identity in a world that had long denied her stability and recognition. This careful alchemy of beauty, charm, and performance would become the cornerstone of her meteoric rise, laying the foundation for the stardom, challenges, and heartbreak that awaited her in the years to come. Every smile was intentional, every gesture rehearsed, and every glance carried the weight of a past she could never fully escape, but one she could shape into legend. By the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe's meticulously crafted persona was ready to step into the spotlight. The painstaking reinvention from Norma Jean to Marilyn Monroe had not only honed her image, but also prepared her for the demanding realities of Hollywood stardom. Her first notable break came with The Asphalt Jungle, 1950, a small but pivotal role that hinted at her natural charisma. While her screen time was limited, casting directors and audiences alike began to notice her unique blend of innocence and allure, a magnetic presence that demanded attention even in minor appearances. Monroe's career trajectory accelerated with All About Eve, 1950, in which she played the seemingly naive yet enigmatic Miss Caswell. Though her role was brief, critics noted her comedic timing and undeniable screen presence. For Monroe, each minor part was a proving ground, a laboratory where she could experiment with gestures, voice, and nuance, refining the signature performance style that would later define her career. These early roles also reinforced a crucial lesson: In Hollywood, perception often mattered as much as performance. Her charm, carefully calibrated, could outshine even more experienced actors. The film that truly launched Monroe into international recognition was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953. Her portrayal of Lorelei Lee, the gold-digging yet endearing showgirl, was a revelation. Monroe's combination of vulnerability, wit, and sex appeal captured the imagination of audiences worldwide. Songs like Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend became instantly iconic, and Monroe's performance transcended the screen, influencing fashion, advertising, and popular culture. Critics and fans alike were captivated by her ability to embody both fantasy and relatability, a delicate balance few stars could achieve. Her breakout success was not accidental. Monroe had honed every aspect of her performance through years of deliberate practice. Her gestures, expressions, and vocal inflections were calibrated to maximize emotional impact, blending humor and sensuality in ways that felt effortless yet were carefully orchestrated. Even her off-screen persona was managed strategically. Public appearances, interviews, and photographs were opportunities to reinforce the myth of Marilyn Monroe while maintaining an air of accessibility and charm. Every move was part of a larger performance, a sophisticated understanding of celebrity that few young actresses possessed. Despite her growing fame, Monroe remained acutely aware of Hollywood's mercurial nature. Success could vanish overnight, and typecasting loomed as a constant threat. While she was celebrated for her beauty and comedic talent, she also longed for roles that challenged her as an actress, that allowed her to move beyond the blonde bombshell stereotype. This tension between public adoration and personal ambition became a defining feature of her career, shaping choices that were as strategic as they were artistic. Her stardom brought both opportunity and scrutiny. Fans adored her, but the media relentlessly dissected her every move. Headlines fixated on her appearance, wardrobe, and romantic life, often overshadowing her professional achievements. Monroe learned to navigate this dual reality, cultivating relationships with photographers, journalists, and publicists who could help shape her narrative. She understood that controlling the story surrounding her life was nearly as important as controlling her performances on screen. The commercial success of films like How to Marry a Millionaire, 1953, and The 7-Year Itch, 1955, cemented Monroe's status as a Hollywood icon. Her image, platinum hair, red lips, and a combination of innocence and seduction became a cultural touchstone, appearing in advertisements, pin-ups, and magazines worldwide. The public's fascination was insatiable. Monroe was not just an actress, but a symbol, a fantasy projected onto the silver screen and into the imagination of millions. Yet behind the glamour, Monroe faced immense pressure. The relentless shooting schedules, promotional tour, and expectation to maintain her flawless public image were exhausting. Studio executives controlled her contracts, dictating roles and appearances, while casting directors evaluated her based on marketability rather than talent alone. Monroe's growing fame was a double-edged sword. It offered unparalleled visibility and influence, but also intensified scrutiny and stress. She learned to mask exhaustion with smiles, to project confidence even when uncertain, and to negotiate the fine line between compliance and self-assertion. Her relationships with co-stars and directors were also a study in negotiation. Monroe navigated a male-dominated industry where charm, wit, and strategic intelligence could determine career trajectory. She cultivated alliances with influential figures while maintaining enough autonomy to assert her professional needs. These interactions reflected an early understanding of her power. Monroe could be the object of desire and the architect of her career simultaneously, leveraging her image to secure better roles, higher pay, and greater creative input. The public's reaction to Monroe's breakout films was unprecedented. Movie theaters were packed, magazines featured her on every cover, and fan letters poured in from across the globe. Monroe's appeal transcended the screen. She became a cultural phenomenon, yet the adoration was also a source of pressure. Every appearance, every photograph, every smile was scrutinized, interpreted, and often distorted. Monroe had become both a star and a symbol, a living icon whose personal identity was increasingly entwined with public perception. By the mid-1950s, Monroe's career had reached a peak that few could rival. She had become synonymous with Hollywood glamour, and her name alone could draw audiences to theaters. Her persona, playful, seductive, and vulnerable, resonated across demographics, making her one of the most bankable stars in the world. Yet beneath the applause and accolades, Monroe felt the persistent weight of expectation. Every performance was a tightrope walk between authenticity and artifice, between public fantasy and private reality. The breakthrough period also revealed Monroe's growing ambition beyond performance. She began exploring opportunities to exert control over her career, from selecting roles to negotiating contracts. This strategic mindset would later lead to groundbreaking moves, including the formation of her own production company. But even in these early years, the seeds of independence were visible. Monroe was not content merely to shine on screen. She sought to influence the machinery that had elevated her, to assert agency in an industry that often reduced women to spectacle. Despite her rising fame, the personal cost of stardom became increasingly apparent. Long hours, relentless media attention, and the pressure to maintain her carefully constructed image began to take a toll on Monroe's mental and physical health. Anxiety, insecurity, and the lingering effects of a tumultuous childhood accompanied her everywhere, beneath the surface of every glamorous photograph. The tension between the luminous public figure and the vulnerable private self would become a defining feature of her life, foreshadowing the struggles that lay ahead. Marilyn Monroe's breakthrough was not simply a matter of luck or beauty. It was the culmination of years of deliberate transformation, strategic thinking, and unrelenting determination. From the uncertain child navigating foster homes to the young actress learning Hollywood's rules, she had honed every skill, every gesture, every glance to create an image that captivated the world. And in 1953, the world finally took notice. The star had risen, and with her ascent came both unprecedented opportunity and the seeds of an enduring tragedy. By the mid-1950s, Marilyn Monroe had achieved a level of fame few could imagine. The world adored her, the studios banked on her star power, and audiences filled theaters wherever her name appeared. Yet behind the platinum hair and radiant smiles lay a pressure cooker of expectations, insecurities, and relentless scrutiny that threatened to fracture the carefully constructed persona she had spent years perfecting. The very fame that brought her success also brought an unending cascade of demands. Monroe's every public appearance was a performance. Photographers captured her smiles, journalists dissected her words, and fans projected fantasies onto her image. While she radiated charm and playfulness on screen, off-camera life was punctuated by anxiety and self-doubt. She was acutely aware of the public gaze and the industry's unforgiving standards. Makeup, wardrobe, and posture were not just aesthetics. They were armor, shields against a world that both celebrated and scrutinized her. Even a minor imperfection could become fodder for gossip, eroding the sense of control she worked so hard to maintain. The pressure extended to the film set, where Monroe often struggled with lines, rehearsals, and technical demands. Directors like George Cukor and Billy Wilder recognized her raw talent, but also witnessed her vulnerability. Some saw it as part of her charm, others viewed it as unreliability. For Monroe, memorizing scripts was an enduring challenge. Anxiety would sometimes make her forget lines or delay takes, leading to frustration from co-stars and crew. Yet, in moments of authenticity, her vulnerability became electric on screen, infusing performances with a depth that few actresses could achieve. This tension between professional expectation and personal limitation became a hallmark of Monroe's career. On one hand, she was the ultimate star, drawing audiences with her charisma, beauty, and comedic timing. On the other, she was a woman navigating complex emotional terrain, often alone, grappling with self-doubt, and haunted by childhood abandonment. The more the world adored her, the more intensely she felt its weight. Glamour and pressure were inseparable, two sides of the same coin that defined her existence. Studio life itself was both a blessing and a cage. Contracts dictated not only the films she appeared in, but also her public conduct, travel schedules, and even personal relationships. Monroe was often treated as a commodity, her image packaged and sold for profit. While she enjoyed the benefits of fame, she also understood that her autonomy was limited. The industry could elevate or discard her with a single decision, and the knowledge fueled both fear and determination. She realized she had to master the delicate balance between compliance and assertiveness to protect her career and her sense of self. Monroe's personal relationships, already complicated by fame, were further strained by these pressures. Her marriages, particularly to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio and playwright Arthur Miller, drew intense media scrutiny. Public fascination with her love life often overshadowed her professional achievements, reinforcing the idea that her value lay as much in her image as in her talent. She struggled to maintain intimacy while being constantly observed, and the intrusion of cameras and gossip columns intensified feelings of isolation. Even social settings could become arenas of tension. Hollywood parties, premieres, and award ceremonies demanded poise, charm, and perfection at all times. Any misstep, however minor, could become headline news. Monroe's instinct was to perform, to present herself as effortlessly radiant, yet beneath the surface she felt the strain. Her laughter, often bright and musical, masked the anxiety that accompanied nearly every interaction. In these moments, the dichotomy of glamour versus pressure was stark. The world adored her, but the adoration came with a hidden cost that few could see. Monroe also faced internalized pressures. She knew she was being typecast as the blonde bombshell, celebrated for sensuality more than artistry. Roles that could challenge her or reveal her depth were scarce, and the industry often resisted seeing beyond her carefully crafted persona. This professional limitation created frustration and fueled her desire for independence, yet also magnified self-criticism. She pushed herself to improve, studying acting, vocal inflection, and stagecraft, seeking to prove that her talent extended beyond physical allure. Mental health challenges began to surface during this period. Anxiety, depression, and insomnia became recurring companions, often exacerbated by the relentless public gaze and the high stakes of studio expectations. Monroe relied on medication to manage these pressures, a coping mechanism that would become a persistent thread throughout her life. Despite her growing success, these struggles underscored the human cost of her fame, the fragility behind the myth, the vulnerability hidden beneath layers of performance. Public image management became an essential skill. Monroe cultivated relationships with photographers, journalists, and publicists who could amplify her star quality while controlling narratives about her personal life. She learned to negotiate her public persona carefully, allowing glimpses of spontaneity while maintaining enough mystique to keep audiences intrigued. Every smile, every interview, every photograph was a deliberate choice, an act of both artistry and self-preservation. Despite the glamour and acclaim, the constant pressure left Monroe feeling increasingly isolated. Friends and colleagues often admired her, but could not penetrate the barriers she erected to protect her private self. Trust was scarce, and loneliness was pervasive. The child who had moved from foster home to foster home, who had experienced abandonment and instability, now carried those shadows into adulthood, intensified by fame rather than alleviated by it. Every accolade, every standing ovation was tinged with an undercurrent of vulnerability. Monroe's awareness of the delicate balance between admiration and exploitation sharpened her instincts. She understood that fame was not only power, but also a trap. Public fascination could elevate her, but it could also confine her, reducing her to an image rather than recognizing her full humanity. This realization informed her decisions both on and off screen, influencing the choices she made in relationships, career negotiations, and personal expression. By the late 1950s, the tension between glamour and pressure had become central to Monroe's life. Her films were blockbusters, her image iconic, yet the personal cost was mounting. She was trapped between the adoration of millions and the unrelenting demands of an industry that prioritized spectacle over substance. Every smile and every laugh was meticulously constructed, hiding the anxiety, self-doubt, and fatigue beneath. Monroe's brilliance on screen was inseparable from the struggle off it, a luminous performance shadowed by human fragility. This duality, radiant glamour paired with relentless pressure, would define the coming years of Monroe's life. It was a delicate, often dangerous balancing act, one that required constant vigilance and resilience. The world saw the dazzling star, the idealized symbol of beauty and charm, but Monroe's private experience was far more complex. A young woman navigating fame, expectation, and personal demons, seeking to maintain control in a system that offered little. The stage was set, the spotlight blinding, and the pressures unrelenting. Marilyn Monroe had arrived at the peak of stardom, yet the very success that elevated her also threatened to consume her. Marilyn Monroe's rise to stardom was mirrored by a relentless focus on her personal life, a focus fueled by both public fascination and her own longing for connection. The glamorous veneer of Hollywood often masked the emotional turbulence she carried from childhood, yet her romantic relationships became central to the narrative of her life. They were intensely scrutinized, sensationalized, and at times manipulated by the media, leaving Monroe caught between genuine desire for intimacy and the unrelenting pressures of fame. Her first widely publicized marriage to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio in 1954 seemed to the public like a perfect pairing of American icons. DiMaggio, reserved and stoic, contrasted sharply with Monroe's effervescent charm, creating a union that fascinated fans and journalists alike. Yet beneath the headlines and photographs, the marriage was fraught with challenges. Monroe's career demanded constant travel and public appearances, while DiMaggio struggled to reconcile his private life with the scrutiny of paparazzi and gossip columns. Loneliness, miscommunication, and the weight of expectation created a delicate, often tense dynamic that neither could fully resolve. Monroe's relationships were often intensified by her desire for security and emotional validation. The child who had grown up moving between foster homes and temporary guardianships sought stability in adult love, yet her very fame made that stability elusive. In many ways, her romantic entanglements mirrored her career trajectory, dazzling on the surface, complicated and precarious underneath. She craved genuine connection, yet the intensity of public attention often distorted the people around her, making it difficult to separate authenticity from performance. The marriage to DiMaggio ended in divorce after just 9 months, leaving Monroe heartbroken and publicly exposed. The short-lived union highlighted the challenges of navigating personal desire in a world that constantly watched, judged, and projected fantasies onto her. Monroe's vulnerability, so carefully hidden in public, became an open wound behind the camera's eye. The heartbreak of this first high-profile relationship would echo throughout her subsequent attempts at love, revealing a pattern of longing and disappointment that mirrored the instability of her early life. Monroe's next major relationship with playwright Arthur Miller was both a personal and intellectual turning point. Unlike DiMaggio, Miller represented a different kind of connection, one grounded in shared ambition, intellectual discourse, and artistic exploration. Their marriage in 1956 offered Monroe a semblance of stability and understanding, yet it was not without tension. Monroe's struggle with self-doubt, compounded by ongoing studio pressures and personal insecurities, sometimes clashed with Miller's structured, analytical temperament. Even in this union, Monroe's fame was a constant third presence, mediating every interaction and decision. The public's obsession with Monroe's love life often exacerbated her own insecurities. Paparazzi, gossip columns, and fan speculation turned private moments into public spectacle. Simple outings, casual gestures, or personal choices were dissected, interpreted, and exaggerated. The intense scrutiny left Monroe oscillating between craving connection and retreating into isolation. In many ways, her romantic life became a mirror of the duality she had learned to navigate in Hollywood. Public appearance versus private reality, desire versus fear, intimacy versus performative necessity. Monroe's romantic choices were not merely emotional, they were strategic, conscious decisions within the context of her career. She understood the ways in which associations could enhance her image, expand her influence, or solidify her place in Hollywood's hierarchy. Yet strategy could not shield her from emotional pain. Each relationship carried the risk of exposure, disappointment, or betrayal, reflecting the precarious balance between fame, love, and self-preservation. The heartbreak Monroe endured extended beyond the romantic sphere. Friendships, studio alliances, and professional partnerships were often transient, contingent upon her perceived value or the whims of those around her. Trust, always scarce, required constant vigilance. This reality mirrored her early life, where security was temporary and dependency precarious. Romantic relationships for Monroe were attempts to claim stability and connection in a world that frequently denied her both. Her experiences with love also informed her artistic expression. The vulnerability, longing, and complexity of her personal life translated into nuanced performances that resonated deeply with audiences. Viewers, consciously or unconsciously, responded to the emotional authenticity she infused into her roles. Monroe's persona, at once playful, seductive, and achingly human, was inseparable from her lived experience. Each heartbreak, each moment of emotional struggle, became a thread in the tapestry of her cinematic legacy. Even as she navigated personal disappointments, Monroe's public image remained dazzlingly intact. She mastered the art of separating private pain from public performance, ensuring that heartbreak never overshadowed the charm and magnetism audiences adored. Yet the tension between interior suffering and exterior radiance intensified over time, setting the stage for the profound personal challenges she would face in the coming years. By the late 1950s, Monroe's pattern in love had crystallized, a yearning for connection counterbalanced by the pressures of fame, a search for stability undermined by external scrutiny, and a repeated confrontation with heartbreak. Each relationship, whether brief or enduring, was shaped by these dynamics, reinforcing the paradox that would define her life: the simultaneous desire for intimacy and the inevitability of isolation. Monroe's love life, while often portrayed in tabloids as glamorous or scandalous, was deeply intertwined with the person she had become. The child who had longed for permanence now sought it in adult relationships, only to encounter the unrelenting reality that fame amplified both connection and pain. Romantic experiences became an arena where her personal and professional worlds collided, revealing the complex interplay between desire, ambition, and vulnerability. Ultimately, Monroe's journey through love and heartbreak illuminated the human cost of stardom. Fame offered attention, admiration, and influence, but it also magnified insecurities, distorted relationships, and intensified emotional vulnerability. In her pursuit of love, Monroe confronted not only the challenges of celebrity, but also the unresolved traumas of her early life. The glittering image adored by the world was inseparable from the private, searching, often wounded woman beneath. The tension between public persona and private self, romance and reality, glamour and heartbreak, defining the paradox that would follow her to the very end. While the world saw Marilyn Monroe as a captivating actress and cultural icon, few fully recognized the sharp business acumen that propelled her career. Behind the platinum hair and radiant smile was a woman acutely aware of Hollywood's mechanisms, a young star learning to navigate contracts, negotiate salaries, and strategically shape her public image to maximize both influence and income. Monroe's understanding of her value went far beyond aesthetic appeal. She was beginning to claim control in a male-dominated industry that rarely afforded women autonomy. Monroe's early contracts with 20th Century Fox reflected the standard limitations of the studio system. Actors were bound by long-term agreements that dictated roles, appearances, and even aspects of their personal lives. These contracts often favored the studio, leaving performers with little leverage. Yet Monroe, even in the late 1940s and early 1950s, demonstrated a keen understanding of negotiation. She recognized that her rising popularity gave her leverage, and she began to insist on better roles, higher pay, and more creative input. Each negotiation was an exercise in asserting agency within a system designed to minimize it. Her transformation into Marilyn Monroe was not just a personal reinvention, it was a brand strategy. Monroe understood the power of persona as currency. Public appearances, magazine covers, interviews, and photo shoots were not incidental. They were calculated opportunities to reinforce her image and increase her marketability. By carefully managing how she was perceived, she could command greater attention, higher salaries, and more desirable roles. It was a strategy that anticipated modern celebrity marketing decades before the term existed. In 1954, Monroe made a landmark move that would redefine her career trajectory. Frustrated with the limitations imposed by studio contracts and dissatisfied with typecasting, she successfully renegotiated her Fox contract, securing unprecedented creative control and a significant increase in salary. This act was more than a business decision, it was a statement. Monroe was asserting that she was not merely a product to be exploited, but a professional with agency, vision, and the ability to shape her own career. It marked the emergence of a new model for female stars in Hollywood, women who could leverage fame to claim both creative and financial authority. Monroe's understanding of the business extended to publicity. She recognized the power of media to construct narrative, influence perception, and drive box office success. Carefully orchestrated photo sessions, selective interviews, and cultivated relationships with journalists allowed her to shape how the public perceived her both on and off screen. Monroe's image, playful, glamorous, and approachable, was carefully maintained, yet always with a subtle undertone of control. She understood that fame was as much a managed performance as any role she played in film. In 1955, Monroe took an even bolder step, co-founding Marilyn Monroe Productions, a company that allowed her to select projects, control production, and exercise a degree of creative freedom previously denied to women in Hollywood. This venture demonstrated remarkable foresight. Monroe was not only seeking artistic recognition, but also financial independence, challenging a system that had long restricted female stars to roles dictated by studio executives. It was a gamble, a risk in a male-dominated industry, yet one that underscored her intelligence, ambition, and business insight. The formation of her production company coincided with her pursuit of more serious, challenging roles. Monroe wanted to be recognized as a legitimate actress, not just a sex symbol. Films such as Bus Stop, 1956, allowed her to showcase emotional depth and range, proving that she could carry complex characters and dramatic narratives. By aligning her business decisions with artistic ambitions, Monroe began to redefine her career on her own terms, setting a precedent for how star power could be leveraged into creative autonomy. Negotiation and assertiveness became recurring themes in Monroe's professional life. She demanded better scripts, collaborated with directors to shape characters, and used her popularity to influence casting decisions. These moves, while sometimes viewed as rebellious in a studio environment, reflected a sophisticated understanding of supply, demand, and leverage. Monroe recognized that her public persona granted her power, and she wielded it judiciously, balancing charm with strategic insistence. Financial savvy was also part of Monroe's repertoire. She negotiated contracts that accounted for bonuses, box office percentages, and profit-sharing agreements, practices not commonly extended to actresses at the time. Her foresight ensured that she could benefit materially from the commercial success her image generated, transforming celebrity into sustainable financial security. By taking control of her earnings, Monroe demonstrated that star power and business acumen were not mutually exclusive. Monroe's ability to blend artistry, image, and business sense was revolutionary. She challenged the notion that women in Hollywood could be both glamorous icons and shrewd entrepreneurs. Her contemporaries often underestimated her intelligence, focusing instead on her charm and appearance, but Monroe quietly accumulated knowledge, built networks, and exercised influence with precision. Her strategic mind was evident in every choice, from the roles she accepted, to the public image she curated, to the contracts she negotiated. Despite these achievements, Monroe's business endeavors were not without obstacles. Studio executives resisted her assertiveness, critics sometimes questioned her motives, and peers occasionally disparaged her ambition. Yet Monroe persisted, demonstrating resilience and an ability to navigate the complex interplay of power, perception, and performance. Her success was not handed to her, it was engineered through a combination of talent, intelligence, and unyielding determination. The The duality of Monroe's public and private lives remained central. While she mastered the business of celebrity, she continued to contend with anxiety, self-doubt, and the pressures of maintaining her constructed persona. Her brilliance as an entrepreneur and performer existed alongside vulnerability, creating a tension that fueled both her allure and her struggles. The business of Marilyn was inseparable from the personal story of Norma Jean. The careful negotiation, strategic reinvention, and relentless pursuit of autonomy mirrored her lifelong journey of self-assertion. By the late 1950s, Marilyn Monroe had transformed herself from a studio-controlled ingenue into a formidable force in Hollywood, a woman who wielded her image, her talent, and her business acumen to shape her destiny. She had proven that glamour and intelligence were not mutually exclusive, that fame could be leveraged for agency, and that a woman could command both attention and respect in an industry designed to limit her power. Yet the very intensity of her success, the constant negotiations, and the pressures of visibility would continue to exact a profound personal cost, foreshadowing the emotional battles she would face in the years ahead. Behind the glamour, the laughter, and the carefully choreographed smiles, Marilyn Monroe wrestled with personal demons that often threatened to unravel the life she had meticulously constructed. Fame had amplified every insecurity she carried from childhood: the fear of abandonment, the yearning for approval, and the persistent shadow of self-doubt. In private, Monroe's world was far removed from the sparkling premieres and magazine covers. It was filled with anxiety, insomnia, and a constant effort to reconcile her public persona with her inner vulnerability. Monroe's struggles were multifaceted. She grappled with chronic self-doubt, a lingering residue from years of instability in foster homes and orphanages. This early lack of security had instilled a deep need for reassurance, a desire to be loved and valued unconditionally. Yet the nature of her celebrity made that nearly impossible. The adoration of millions often felt superficial, transactional, and fleeting, leaving her with an enduring sense of isolation. Even when surrounded by fans, friends, or co-stars, Monroe often felt invisible beneath the weight of expectation. Mental health challenges became a recurring theme in Monroe's life. Anxiety attacks, bouts of depression, and periods of emotional fragility punctuated her career. Sleep was elusive, often replaced by restless nights filled with worry or rehearsing scenes, and medication became a tool, sometimes a lifeline, to navigate the intensity of both professional and personal pressures. These struggles were compounded by the relentless scrutiny of the media, which dissected every gesture, statement, and relationship, turning private turmoil into public spectacle. Substance use emerged as both a coping mechanism and a symptom of her pressures. Monroe relied on medications to manage insomnia, calm nerves, and navigate the emotional rollercoaster of fame. While these substances provided temporary relief, they also introduced new vulnerabilities. The reliance on pharmaceuticals, combined with the demands of stardom, created cycles of dependence and risk that would shadow her throughout her adult life. Yet to Monroe, these measures were pragmatic, tools to maintain performance when the world expected perfection. Her personal relationships often reflected the intersection of intimacy and instability. Marriages to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller, while deeply meaningful, were fraught with tension. The pressures of fame, compounded by Monroe's emotional vulnerabilities, created a landscape where love and anxiety intertwined. Even within these relationships, she struggled to find the balance between dependence and autonomy, longing for connection while fearing betrayal or rejection. Every emotional misstep was magnified by public attention, intensifying the private anguish that lay beneath her public smile. Professional pressures compounded her personal struggles. The studio system, while providing fame and fortune, was notoriously rigid. Directors and executives could be dismissive, controlling, or critical, often undermining Monroe's confidence. Typecasting as the blonde bombshell frustrated her artistic ambitions, creating a tension between commercial expectation and personal aspiration. She longed for substantive roles that would challenge her and allow audiences to see the depth of her talent, yet the industry often resisted seeing beyond her curated persona. Therapy and support networks were intermittent. Monroe sought guidance from psychologists, mentors, and trusted confidants, attempting to navigate the psychological toll of her life. Yet even with assistance, the combination of early trauma, relentless scrutiny, and internalized pressure created a fragile equilibrium. Small setbacks could trigger disproportionate anxiety, while periods of success offered fleeting relief rather than lasting security. The emotional landscape she navigated was as complex and demanding as the roles she portrayed on screen. Monroe's public image, playful, radiant, and confident, was a carefully constructed counterpoint to her private struggles. Every smile, laugh, and flirtatious glance was both performance and defense, a way to shield herself from exposure while satisfying public expectation. The tension between appearance and reality became a central theme of her existence, defining the duality that audiences adored unknowingly. Her vulnerability was rarely visible, yet it informed every gesture, inflection, and expression. Despite the turmoil, Monroe exhibited resilience. She continued to perform, negotiate contracts, and cultivate her public image with discipline and foresight. Her ability to compartmentalize, to perform under pressure while managing private crises, was remarkable. Yet the emotional toll was profound, a constant undercurrent that shaped her choices, her relationships, and her artistic expression. Every scene, every photograph, every public engagement was a negotiation between survival and authenticity, between the demands of fame and the needs of the self. These battles were not merely personal, they were systemic. Hollywood, like society at large, offered women limited pathways to power, often exploiting their vulnerabilities while celebrating their beauty. Monroe's struggles reflected broader dynamics: the tension between talent and commodification, autonomy and expectation, authenticity and performance. She navigated these challenges with ingenuity and courage, even as they exacted a profound personal cost. By the late 1950s, Monroe's private demons were intensifying. The pressures of fame, compounded by unresolved childhood trauma and the demands of constant visibility, created a volatile mix. Episodes of anxiety and depression became more frequent, and her reliance on medication grew. Friends and colleagues observed moments of fragility beneath the glamour, glimpses of a woman wrestling with forces far larger than herself. These struggles foreshadowed the tragedies that would later define her life, even as she continued to shine brilliantly on screen. Yet in her battles, Monroe demonstrated insight and determination. She recognized patterns in her relationships, career, and emotional responses, attempting to assert control where possible. She sought roles that allowed her to explore complex characters, negotiated contracts to secure autonomy, and cultivated strategies for public presentation. Her intelligence, resilience, and self-awareness were often overshadowed by media narratives, yet they were integral to her survival and her artistry. Ultimately, Monroe's private struggles illuminated the cost of brilliance. Her life was a study in contrasts: radiant fame versus internal fragility, public adoration versus personal loneliness, strategic mastery versus emotional vulnerability. These battles, while deeply personal, also informed her artistry, lending authenticity and depth to the persona that captivated millions. Behind every smile and every iconic pose was a woman navigating complex emotional terrain, striving to reconcile the dazzling illusion of Marilyn Monroe with the vulnerable reality of Norma Jean Baker. By the late 1950s, Marilyn Monroe had become far more than a Hollywood actress. She was a cultural phenomenon. Her name, image, and performances transcended cinema, influencing fashion, advertising, and societal conceptions of beauty and femininity. Films such as Some Like It Hot, 1959, and The 7-Year Itch, 1955, not only showcased her comedic timing and charisma, but also solidified her status as a symbol of sensuality, charm, and playful sophistication. Monroe's impact extended beyond entertainment. She became a mirror reflecting the desires, anxieties, and fantasies of post-war America. The 7-Year Itch remains iconic, not only for its narrative, but for the unforgettable scene in which Monroe's white dress billows above a subway grate. The image became a defining symbol of mid-century glamour, reproduced endlessly in magazines, advertisements, and popular culture. Yet beyond the spectacle, Monroe's performance revealed subtlety and self-awareness. She imbued humor, vulnerability, and timing into a role that could have easily become a caricature. Her ability to balance comedy and sensuality elevated the film and cemented her public persona as both desirable and relatable. In Some Like It Hot, Monroe demonstrated her skill as a performer who could carry a film through wit, timing, and vulnerability. Playing the naive and charming sugarcane, she combined innocence and allure with comedic brilliance, earning critical acclaim and audience adoration alike. Director Billy Wilder recognized her potential, guiding her performance while allowing her natural instincts to shine. Monroe's ability to absorb direction while contributing her own interpretive choices exemplified the sophistication behind her seemingly effortless performances. Her cultural influence extended far beyond film. Monroe's fashion choices, from the plunging gowns on screen to the casual elegance of public appearances, shaped style trends across the United States and internationally. Photographs, magazine covers, and advertisements featuring Monroe became cultural touchstones, influencing how women dressed, styled their hair, and conceptualized glamour. She was more than an actress. She was a trendsetter and a symbol of aspiration, embodying ideals of beauty and sophistication that captivated millions. Monroe's image also intersected with broader societal dynamics. Post-war America was experiencing shifts in gender roles, sexual mores, and media consumption, and Monroe became an emblem of these transformations. Her persona, a mix of sensuality, vulnerability, and intelligence, challenged traditional norms while remaining palatable to mainstream audiences. Women admired her confidence and style, men were drawn to her charm, and cultural commentators debated her influence, cementing her status as a figure of both fascination and controversy. Her films became commercial juggernauts, demonstrating her undeniable bankability. Studios, recognizing her draw, leveraged Monroe's image for box office success, marketing her both as a performer and as an aspirational symbol. Yet Monroe's understanding of her own value allowed her to negotiate contracts, select projects strategically, and eventually assert greater creative control. Her business savvy complemented her artistic talent, blending performance, strategy, and public appeal into a formula that few could replicate. Critically, Monroe's contributions to cinema extended beyond superficial glamour. Her nuanced performances revealed depth, comedic timing, and emotional resonance, challenging the notion that her roles were purely decorative. Directors and co-stars noted her instinctive understanding of pacing, expression, and audience engagement. Monroe's persona, the playful, vulnerable, and seductive Marilyn, was inseparable from her craft, a carefully calibrated interplay between performance and authenticity. Her impact on popular culture was amplified by mass media. Television appearances, magazine spreads, and press coverage ensured that Monroe's image penetrated every corner of American life. She became a reference point for discussions on beauty, sexuality, and celebrity, shaping perceptions and inspiring both adulation and critique. Scholars, journalists, and fans analyzed her every move, solidifying her legacy as a figure whose influence extended beyond the confines of cinema into the broader cultural imagination. Monroe also influenced the music and advertising industries. Her sultry voice, distinctive laugh, and persona became benchmarks for emulation in advertising campaigns, musical performances, and public appearances. Companies used her likeness and style to sell products, demonstrating the convergence of celebrity, commerce, and cultural aspiration. Monroe was, in effect, a living brand, one whose influence transcended traditional artistic categories and reached into everyday life. Despite her widespread acclaim, Monroe remained aware of the gap between public perception and personal reality. While audiences adored the image of Marilyn Monroe, the pressures, anxieties, and vulnerabilities behind the scenes remained constant. She navigated this duality with care, maintaining the dazzling persona while striving to assert creative autonomy, preserve personal dignity, and confront her inner struggles. The interplay between visibility and vulnerability became central to her existence, shaping both her performances and her legacy. Monroe's iconic roles also challenged the entertainment industry's understanding of female stardom. She demonstrated that a woman could command attention, humor, and respect while simultaneously embodying beauty and sexuality. This balance reshaped expectations for actresses, highlighting the power of persona, agency, and strategic self-fashioning in a male-dominated industry. Monroe's success foreshadowed later generations of performers who would navigate similar tensions between image, talent, and cultural impact. By the early 1960s, Monroe's cultural significance was undeniable. Her films were classics, her image a symbol of beauty and desire, and her influence on fashion, style, and media pervasive. Yet, behind the public admiration lay the ongoing tensions that had defined her life: personal vulnerability, the pressures of fame, and the constant negotiation between authenticity and performance. These dynamics made her both beloved and tragically human, a star whose brilliance was inseparable from the complexities of her private existence. In sum, Monroe's body of work and cultural presence transformed her into more than a Hollywood star. She became an icon, a symbol, and a trendsetter whose influence reached beyond cinema into the collective imagination of society. Her films, style, and public persona created a legacy that continues to resonate, illustrating the intricate interplay between talent, image, and cultural context. Yet even at the height of her impact, the pressures, insecurities, and vulnerabilities that had shaped her from childhood persisted, hinting at the deeper struggles behind the dazzling surface. Despite her unparalleled fame and cultural influence, Marilyn Monroe faced persistent struggles with control, both over her career and her personal life. The industry that had elevated her also sought to define her, typecasting her as the blonde bombshell, while limiting her access to roles that would allow her to demonstrate the depth of her talent. Monroe's public image, carefully cultivated over years of reinvention, became both a source of power and a cage from which she could not entirely escape. The tension between autonomy and expectation intensified as Monroe's career progressed. Studio executives continued to exert significant control, dictating filming schedules, promotional appearances, and even the scripts she was assigned. While Monroe had achieved a degree of leverage through contract negotiations and the founding of Marilyn Monroe Productions, she still encountered resistance when attempting to assert her creative vision. Each demand for control was met with institutional inertia, reminding her that fame did not equate to absolute authority. This struggle manifested on set, where Monroe's desire for perfection often clashed with the logistical realities of filmmaking. Directors and co-stars sometimes interpreted her meticulous preparation and insistence on retakes as difficult behavior, yet Monroe's approach was rooted in her commitment to authenticity and excellence. She understood that her public image was inseparable from her performance. Even a small flaw could undermine the persona she had worked years to perfect. The pushback she received, often gendered in nature, highlighted the systemic biases of Hollywood and reinforced the challenges women faced in asserting creative control. Monroe's personal life mirrored these struggles for control. Her marriages, particularly to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller, were punctuated by attempts to reconcile love with independence. In both unions, she confronted the tension between vulnerability and authority, yearning for intimacy while resisting domination or manipulation. The public scrutiny surrounding these relationships only heightened the pressure, making it difficult for Monroe to exercise agency without external interference. Her emotional needs and her career ambitions often collided, revealing the complex interplay of fame, desire, and autonomy. Creative control extended to Monroe's selection of roles. She became increasingly discerning, rejecting parts that perpetuated reductive stereotypes and pursuing characters that allowed her to explore nuance and depth. Films like Bus Stop and Some Like It Hot reflected her insistence on performances that combined charm with complexity. Yet these choices came at a cost. The industry's willingness to pigeonhole her persisted, and resistance from studio executives sometimes delayed or complicated projects. Monroe's determination to steer her career exemplified her growing assertion of professional power, but also highlighted the structural limitations imposed on women in Hollywood. Monroe also navigated control in her public image. She understood that the media could shape perception and sought to influence narratives about her life. Carefully orchestrated appearances, interviews, and photo shoots reinforced her desired persona while protecting her private self. Yet the balance was precarious. The public's fascination and the press's appetite for scandal often undermined her efforts. Monroe's awareness of these dynamics revealed a sophisticated grasp of branding, reputation management, and the economics of celebrity long before these concepts became commonplace. The struggle for control was compounded by Monroe's personal vulnerabilities. Anxiety, insomnia, and periods of depression undermined her confidence and complicated her ability to maintain authority over her career and image. Medication and therapy were intermittent supports, helping her navigate professional and personal pressures, yet they could not erase the ongoing tension between expectation and autonomy. The oscillation between brilliance and fragility became a defining characteristic of her life, illustrating both her resilience and the human cost of fame. Monroe's production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, represented a strategic effort to reclaim agency. Through this venture, she could select projects, shape roles, and assert creative influence in ways previously denied to actresses of her era. The company was not only a business enterprise, but also a platform for self-determination, a tangible expression of Monroe's refusal to remain confined by the limitations imposed by studios and societal expectations. It demonstrated foresight, ambition, and a willingness to risk criticism in pursuit of autonomy. Yet even as she asserted professional control, Monroe faced challenges in balancing authority with collaboration. Film sets required negotiation, diplomacy, and compromise, and her pursuit of perfection sometimes created tension with co-stars and directors. These conflicts, often exaggerated by media coverage, fed narratives of volatility, obscuring the intentionality and sophistication underlying her actions. Monroe's struggle reflected the broader tension women in Hollywood experienced, the fine line between assertiveness and perception of difficulty, and the double standards that shaped reputations and opportunities. Monroe's challenges with control extended to her personal expression and public conduct. Every gesture, smile, or comment was scrutinized, leaving little room for spontaneity. She learned to navigate this scrutiny carefully, crafting an exterior of confidence and charm while managing the interior pressures of expectation and anxiety. Her ability to perform under relentless observation became both a survival strategy and a testament to her resilience. By the early 1960s, the struggle for control was an ongoing central theme in Monroe's life. Professionally, she fought to shape her career trajectory, negotiate contracts, and select meaningful roles. Personally, she sought stability, autonomy, and emotional fulfillment amidst public scrutiny and private vulnerabilities. These dual struggles define the tension between Marilyn and Norma Jean, the iconic persona and the human woman behind it, illustrating the complex interplay of agency, expectation, and identity. Ultimately, Monroe's ongoing battle for control highlighted both her brilliance and the systemic forces arrayed against her. She possessed the insight, intelligence, and strategic acumen to assert authority, yet the pressures of fame, gender dynamics, and public fascination constrained her efforts. This tension between autonomy and limitation, public image and private reality, was a defining element of her life, shaping the triumphs, challenges, and heartbreaks that would follow. As Marilyn Monroe's star rose to unprecedented heights, the intensity of public scrutiny and media fascination escalated. Every facet of her life, her performances, fashion choices, personal relationships, and even idle gestures, was dissected, interpreted, and often sensationalized. Newspapers, magazines, and television relentlessly pursued stories, perpetuating an image that alternated between adoration and critique. Monroe, acutely aware of the consequences of exposure, learned to navigate this unforgiving spotlight, yet the pressure exacted a profound emotional toll. The media obsession began with her early breakthroughs, but by the late 1950s, it had reached a fever pitch. Headlines speculated on her romantic life, her mood on set, and even the minutiae of her appearance. Paparazzi camps were common outside her homes, and journalists often blurred the lines between fact and conjecture. Every public interaction became a potential story, amplifying both her fame and her vulnerabilities. Monroe's carefully curated image, playful, glamorous, and seemingly effortless, was constantly under siege, forcing her to engage in a delicate dance between openness and privacy. Marilyn's love life was a particular magnet for media scrutiny. Her marriages to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller, as well as rumored affairs with powerful figures, were treated as public property, dissected in columns, and broadcast for mass consumption. This intrusion compounded the challenges of intimacy, making authentic connection extraordinarily difficult. Monroe's emotional needs, her desire for stability, affection, and trust, were constantly challenged by the relentless gaze of the press, highlighting the personal cost of her celebrity. The portrayal of Monroe in the media often amplified stereotypes, focusing on her sex appeal while minimizing her intelligence, creativity, and business acumen. Headlines labeled her as difficult or temperamental when she asserted creative control or demanded better roles. In many ways, the media reinforced Hollywood's double standards. Assertiveness was punished, while compliance was rewarded. Monroe learned to navigate these dynamics, understanding that public perception could shape career opportunities, yet the process often left her feeling misrepresented and misunderstood. Magazines and photo shoots played a significant role in constructing and perpetuating Monroe's public persona. Carefully staged images emphasized glamour, sensuality, and charm, creating an enduring visual iconography. Yet these images were often divorced from her lived experience, presenting a polished exterior while masking anxiety, vulnerability, and personal struggle. Monroe understood the power of visual storytelling and worked with photographers and stylists to craft images that reinforced her brand. Yet she was also keenly aware that these images were a form of both empowerment and entrapment. The press's fascination extended to Monroe's professional endeavors. Every film she made, every award nomination she received, and every public appearance became fodder for analysis. Positive reviews were celebrated, while minor missteps were magnified. Directors, co-stars, and even studio executives were scrutinized in relation to her performance, highlighting the disproportionate attention she received. Monroe's brilliance on screen was inseparable from this public gaze, yet the relentless observation often heightened stress and anxiety, making every role a high-stakes performance both on and off camera. Television appearances amplified this scrutiny. Talk shows, interviews, and publicized events allowed Monroe to reach audiences directly, but also subjected her to immediate evaluation. Even seemingly casual moments, laughs, glances, or vocal inflections were interpreted, sometimes mischaracterized, and circulated widely. Monroe's charm and poise often masked the tension and fear she felt in these situations, yet the emotional labor required to maintain composure under constant observation was immense. Monroe's response to media pressure was strategic as well as emotional. She cultivated relationships with sympathetic journalists, leveraged interviews to reinforce her desired narrative, and occasionally used humor or coyness to deflect invasive questions. She recognized that narrative control was a form of survival, enabling her to protect personal boundaries while maintaining public appeal. Yet, despite these efforts, the intensity of scrutiny remained relentless, shaping both her public identity and her private experience. The media's intrusion into Monroe's personal life had tangible consequences. Her privacy was frequently violated, her emotional states speculated upon, and her choices judged without context. Paparazzi surveillance outside her homes, speculation about her health, and sensationalized accounts of her struggles magnified her sense of vulnerability. In response, Monroe oscillated between public engagement and retreat, seeking solitude while managing the demands of an audience that often felt entitled to every detail of her life. Monroe's visibility also amplified societal commentary about women, sexuality, and power. Cultural critics, social commentators and fans debated her roles, image, and influence, reflecting broader anxieties about femininity, celebrity, and morality in post-war America. Monroe became both a mirror and a lightning rod, embodying tensions between desire, propriety, and autonomy. Her life and image were dissected not merely as entertainment, but as symbols in a cultural conversation about gender, power, and representation. Despite the challenges, Monroe continued to engage with the public, balancing vulnerability with resilience. She used interviews, photographs, and public appearances to project confidence and charm, masking the anxiety and self-doubt that often accompanied her daily life. Her mastery of performance extended beyond film, encompassing the intricate choreography of public perception itself. Every interaction was a negotiation, a deliberate act of shaping narrative while preserving as much personal agency as possible. By the early 1960s, the media frenzy surrounding Monroe had reached a near-constant state. Her every move was observed, analyzed, and interpreted, leaving little sanctuary for private life. While the attention affirmed her iconic status, it also intensified emotional pressures, reinforcing patterns of anxiety, isolation, and self-scrutiny. The interplay between public fascination and personal vulnerability would become a defining tension, shaping her decisions, relationships, and ultimately her legacy. Marilyn Monroe's experience with media scrutiny illuminates a broader truth about fame. Visibility is inseparable from vulnerability. She navigated an environment where adoration and intrusion existed side by side, cultivating strategies to survive while continuing to shine. The public adored the star, yet few witnessed the profound emotional cost of constant observation, a cost that would shadow Monroe through the remainder of her life, intertwining with personal struggles, professional ambition, and the tragedy that would ultimately define her story. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe was at a crossroads. Despite her dazzling fame and cultural influence, she was acutely aware of the limitations imposed by Hollywood and the persistent scrutiny of the media. The roles that had brought her adoration, the flirty, comedic, and often superficial parts, were no longer sufficient to convey her depth as an actress. Monroe yearned for reinvention, for projects that would allow her to be seen not merely as a sex symbol, but as a serious, multifaceted performer. Her desire for transformation was both personal and professional. Monroe sought to reclaim control over her career, choosing roles that would challenge her abilities and demonstrate her range. She engaged deeply with acting coaches and directors, studying nuance, timing, and emotional depth to elevate her performances. This commitment reflected a broader vision. Monroe was determined to transition from an icon defined primarily by appearance into an artist recognized for skill, insight, and authenticity. Marilyn Monroe Productions, founded in the late 1950s, became a vehicle for this reinvention. By producing her own projects, she could select scripts, shape character development, and negotiate creative decisions without being beholden to studio executives. One notable example was the production of The Misfits, 1961, written by Arthur Miller, which allowed Monroe to tackle emotionally complex material and work with high-caliber collaborators. The project reflected her ambition to break free from typecasting, to assert control over her career trajectory, and to challenge audiences' perceptions of her. The process of reinvention was fraught with challenges. Monroe's health and personal struggles, including insomnia, anxiety, and dependence on medication, complicated her ability to maintain consistency on set. Directors and co-stars, accustomed to her earlier persona, sometimes struggled to adapt to the intensity and vulnerability she brought to dramatic work. Yet these very challenges highlighted Monroe's commitment to authenticity. She was willing to confront her vulnerabilities head-on, using them as a source of creative power rather than concealing them behind glamour alone. Her reinvention also involved a recalibration of public image. Monroe sought to present herself as more than a playful, alluring figure. She wanted audiences and the industry alike to recognize her intellect, professionalism, and depth. Magazine features, interviews, and public appearances were curated to signal sophistication and artistic ambition, subtly shifting the narrative surrounding her persona. These efforts underscored her understanding of the interplay between image and perception. She was not only an actress, but a brand, one that required careful evolution to maintain relevance and authority. The period of reinvention coincided with significant personal reflection. Monroe increasingly examined the ways her early experiences, childhood instability, foster homes, and abandonment had shaped her self-image and her approach to fame. This introspection informed both her acting choices and her public presentation, creating a layered, more authentic connection between Norma Jean and the public persona of Marilyn Monroe. The effort to reconcile these identities was ongoing, requiring emotional courage and resilience. Monroe's work on the Misfits exemplified the tension inherent in her reinvention. The film demanded emotional intensity, requiring her to inhabit vulnerability, strength, and nuance simultaneously. The physical and psychological demands were immense, yet Monroe's performance reflected a maturity and depth previously unseen in her earlier comedic and romantic roles. Critics recognized the significance of her work, acknowledging her capacity for dramatic storytelling and emotional resonance, though some audiences continued to conflate her personal struggles with on-screen challenges. Financial and logistical pressures also complicated her efforts at reinvention. Producing projects independently required significant investment, negotiation, and risk. Monroe navigated these challenges with a combination of intuition and business acumen, leveraging her star power while managing production constraints. The pursuit of creative autonomy was both courageous and precarious, reflecting her determination to redefine herself despite structural barriers and societal expectations. Monroe's reinvention extended beyond film. She explored different facets of personal expression, including fashion experimentation, philanthropic efforts, and public intellectual engagement. By diversifying the ways in which she presented herself, Monroe sought to expand the narrative of who she was, challenging stereotypes and asserting a multifaceted identity. These efforts were often underappreciated by a public enamored with the iconic blonde bombshell, yet they demonstrated her ambition to evolve beyond a singular, limiting image. Social and cultural currents of the era influenced Monroe's reinvention. The early 1960s were a time of shifting gender dynamics, increased questioning of traditional roles, and the rise of new artistic movements. Monroe's efforts to assert creative control, embrace complex roles, and craft a sophisticated public persona aligned with these broader transformations. She became a symbol not only of glamour, but of a woman asserting autonomy, intellect, and artistic ambition in a society and industry that had long sought to define her narrowly. Despite her strategic and artistic efforts, reinvention was a delicate balancing act. Monroe had to reconcile audience expectations with personal ambition, navigating a landscape where deviation from established persona risked alienating fans, critics, or studio executives. Her public image had become deeply entrenched, and each choice carried weight far beyond the immediate creative outcome. Monroe's courage lay in her willingness to challenge these constraints while continuing to perform under the glare of global attention. In essence, Monroe's attempts at reinvention were as much about reclaiming personal agency as they were about career evolution. She sought to assert control over her narrative, explore the depth of her talent, and reconcile the tension between image and identity. The effort demanded emotional, intellectual, and physical investment, revealing a woman committed to authenticity, resilience, and transformation. Yet these attempts also highlighted the persistent pressures of fame, the ever-present gaze, the risk of failure, and the difficulty of redefining oneself in the public eye. Through reinvention, Monroe demonstrated the complexity of navigating stardom. She was a performer, a businesswoman, and a cultural icon, all while confronting personal vulnerabilities and systemic obstacles. Her journey illustrated that transformation in Hollywood required more than talent. It demanded courage, foresight, and relentless determination. Monroe's evolution in this period set the stage for the final years of her career and life, revealing both the brilliance and the fragility that defined her enduring legacy. As Marilyn Monroe's fame reached its zenith, her personal life became increasingly marked by isolation and loneliness. Despite the adoration of millions and constant attention from the media, she often found herself profoundly disconnected from those around her. The very visibility that had elevated her to iconic status also erected barriers between her and authentic human connection, creating a paradox in which the world's love intensified her private sense of solitude. Monroe's childhood experiences, years spent in foster homes, orphanages, and temporary guardianships, had left deep emotional scars. Early instability fostered a persistent fear of abandonment and a longing for security, both of which carried into adulthood. Romantic relationships, friendships, and professional collaborations were complicated by these vulnerabilities. Even when surrounded by admirers, Monroe often felt misunderstood, judged, or used, heightening her sense of emotional isolation. Her marriages, first to Joe DiMaggio and later to Arthur Miller, reflected the difficulty of maintaining intimacy under the weight of fame. In both unions, Monroe struggled to reconcile her desire for connection with her need for independence. Public scrutiny magnified tensions, while the pressures of career, travel, and media intrusion created distance. Even in moments of closeness, Monroe's inner anxieties often made her feel detached, as though the world's expectations eclipsed her personal needs. Friendships were equally complicated. Hollywood's social circles, while glamorous, were often transactional, shaped by alliances, ambition, and opportunism. Genuine companionship was scarce, and Monroe sometimes found herself questioning motives, unsure whether those around her valued her for who she was or for the power and fame she represented. Isolation was not merely a product of circumstance, it was also a protective response, a barrier against further emotional harm. The relentless media attention exacerbated her solitude. Paparazzi frequently camped outside her homes, while rumors, speculation, and invasive stories infiltrated her personal space. This constant surveillance created an environment in which Monroe had little privacy, making it difficult to cultivate intimacy or even moments of genuine relaxation. The celebrity spotlight illuminated every facet of her existence, yet it could not illuminate the true depth of her inner life, leaving her yearning for connection in ways the public could not comprehend. Monroe's struggles with mental health intensified feelings of isolation. Anxiety, depression, and insomnia were recurring companions, making everyday interactions and responsibilities more challenging. Medication offered temporary relief, but the underlying emotional and psychological issues remained. In moments of vulnerability, Monroe experienced profound loneliness, aware that the person the world adored was not the person she felt herself to be. This duality, public adoration and private emptiness, became a defining feature of her life. The demands of her career further limited her capacity for social engagement. Filming schedules, travel, rehearsals, and public appearances left little room for sustained personal relationships. Even opportunities for genuine human connection were often mediated by professional obligations, creating a life in which performance, rather than companionship, became the primary form of interaction. The very work that sustained her fame and influence contributed to the barriers isolating her from meaningful relationships. Monroe's efforts to forge intimacy were complicated by self-doubt and fear of rejection. She had experienced loss, abandonment, and betrayal from an early age, which shaped her approach to attachment and trust. In adult relationships, these patterns resurfaced. She oscillated between craving closeness and withdrawing to protect herself from potential hurt. Loneliness was both a circumstance and a psychological state, a tension that underscored her humanity beneath the carefully curated glamour of Marilyn Monroe. Even in moments of leisure or apparent social ease, Monroe's solitude remained. Parties, gatherings, and public appearances were often exercises in performance rather than relaxation, reinforcing the distance between her public self and private experience. She learned to mask vulnerability with humor, charm, and charisma, yet the emotional labor required to maintain this exterior was immense. Loneliness became an unspoken companion, shadowing her brilliance and shaping her perspective on life and relationships. Art and creativity provided temporary respite from isolation. Monroe immersed herself in acting, studying lines, and exploring character depth, finding moments of connection within the craft itself. Films offered an outlet for emotion, a medium in which she could channel longing, vulnerability, and strength. Yet even artistic expression could not fully substitute for human connection, leaving a persistent gap between personal desire and reality. The paradox of Monroe's life was stark: adored globally, yet often alone, visible to millions, yet profoundly misunderstood. Her isolation was not solely a result of circumstance, but also a byproduct of the fame that had propelled her to icon status. The more the world fixated on her, the more she struggled to secure authentic, lasting intimacy. In many ways, her loneliness became both a source of pain and a wellspring for her artistry, informing the performances that resonated with audiences worldwide. By the early 1960s, Monroe's personal isolation had deepened. The pressures of reinvention, ongoing media scrutiny, and emotional vulnerability coalesced into a persistent sense of disconnection. Even in the midst of professional triumphs and public admiration, she experienced profound moments of solitude, reflecting the ongoing struggle to reconcile the person behind the persona with the image the world demanded she project. Monroe's experience of loneliness underscores the human cost of fame. While audiences consumed her image, they remained largely unaware of the emotional labor required to sustain it. Her life exemplified the tension between public celebration and private isolation, a duality that shaped her choices, relationships, and ultimately the tragedy that would define her legacy. The glamour that enchanted millions could not fill the void of genuine human connection, leaving Monroe to navigate the delicate balance between visibility and vulnerability, adoration and emptiness, performance and authenticity. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe's life and career were entering a period of both opportunity and turmoil. Professionally, she continued to command attention, with projects and public appearances maintaining her status as one of Hollywood's most magnetic figures. Yet behind the camera, her life had become increasingly fraught with challenges, personal, emotional, and physical, that foreshadowed the tragic conclusion of her journey. Monroe's ongoing struggle for creative autonomy remained central to her professional life. Having established Marilyn Monroe Productions, she was determined to select roles that allowed her to explore depth and nuance, yet the industry was slow to accommodate her ambitions. Projects often faced delays, funding complications, or creative disagreements, leaving Monroe in a constant state of negotiation. Her pursuit of artistic legitimacy was admirable, yet it required navigating a system still resistant to female authority, testing her resilience and fortitude. Her role in The Misfits, 1961, epitomized the tensions of her final years. Written by Arthur Miller and directed by John Huston, the film demanded profound emotional engagement, capturing the complexities of human vulnerability, longing, and resilience. Monroe's performance was widely praised for its depth, revealing layers of talent that transcended her previous blonde bombshell image. Yet the process took a toll. Her emotional and physical fragility, exacerbated by insomnia and reliance on medication, made filming arduous. The effort highlighted both her dedication and the immense pressure under which she labored, underscoring the human cost of sustaining brilliance. Romantic relationships continued to influence Monroe's life during this period. Though divorced from Miller and separated from prior partners, she maintained an enduring desire for intimacy and emotional connection. Encounters with influential figures, rumored affairs with political leaders and high-profile businessmen exposed her to further public scrutiny. These connections, while often speculative in the press, reflected her ongoing search for stability and affirmation amidst the pressures of fame. The interplay between personal desire and public speculation intensified her emotional challenges. Monroe's health, both mental and physical, increasingly impacted her daily life. Chronic insomnia, anxiety, and depression persisted, often requiring intervention through medication. The combination of stress, fatigue, and chemical reliance created a fragile equilibrium, leaving her vulnerable to emotional instability. Friends, colleagues, and collaborators observed fluctuations in her behavior, moments of radiant energy alternating with periods of deep withdrawal. These oscillations highlighted the persistent tension between her public persona and private reality, a duality that had defined her entire adult life. Public scrutiny reached near-constant intensity in Monroe's final years. Media fascination with her appearance, relationships, and personal struggles intensified, creating an environment in which every action was analyzed and amplified. The glare of fame, once a source of power and influence, had become a persistent weight, magnifying insecurities and leaving little sanctuary for private reflection. Monroe's efforts to manage her image, while strategically effective, could not fully insulate her from the emotional consequences of relentless observation. Financially, Monroe remained savvy. She continued to negotiate contracts and project involvement with attention to both creative and monetary stakes. Yet the responsibilities of self-production, coupled with the unpredictability of public reception, created additional pressures. The pursuit of autonomy and artistry, while admirable, demanded sustained energy and emotional labor, compounding the challenges already present in her life. In this period, Monroe also confronted existential questions about her identity. The gap between Norma Jean Baker, the vulnerable, searching woman, and Marilyn Monroe, the icon, performer, and public spectacle, became increasingly pronounced. Attempts at reinvention, artistic control, and personal fulfillment were ongoing, yet she struggled to reconcile these facets into a cohesive self. The dissonance between private reality and public expectation was a constant source of tension, shaping decisions, relationships, and emotional well-being. Despite these pressures, Monroe's charisma, magnetism, and talent remained undeniable. Public appearances continued to captivate audiences, and her influence on film, fashion, and culture endured. She retained the capacity to charm, inspire, and enthrall, even while grappling with profound personal challenges. This juxtaposition, effortless glamour overlaying internal struggle, reinforced the tragic complexity of her life, making her both adored and deeply human. Professional setbacks, however, were intertwined with public misperceptions. Instances of lateness, perceived unreliability, or mood fluctuations were magnified by the media, overshadowing dedication, preparation, and artistry. The pressure to meet both personal standards and public expectation became increasingly unsustainable, straining relationships with directors, co-stars, and studio representatives. Monroe's brilliance, while evident, was often entwined with vulnerability, illustrating the high cost of sustaining a public image under relentless scrutiny. By the early 1960s, Monroe had become emblematic of both the allure and peril of fame. Her star power remained immense, yet the personal toll was increasingly evident. The interplay of professional ambition, romantic yearning, media scrutiny, and emotional fragility created a precarious landscape, one in which triumph and tragedy coexisted. Each day was a negotiation between the demands of celebrity and the needs of the self, a balancing act fraught with both potential and peril. Monroe's final years of stardom were marked by an urgent desire to assert control over her career and her image, even as personal vulnerabilities intensified. She pursued meaningful artistic projects, cultivated strategic public appearances, and sought emotional connection. Yet the weight of expectation, media intrusion, and personal fragility made stability elusive. Her life during this period embodied the tension between brilliance and vulnerability, autonomy and constraint, public fascination and private struggle, a tension that would ultimately culminate in tragedy. In sum, the final phase of Monroe's career showcased both her indomitable talent and the profound human cost of fame. She remained a luminous cultural icon, captivating audiences and shaping Hollywood, while simultaneously confronting the pressures, insecurities, and vulnerabilities that had shadowed her since childhood. These years underscored the paradox of Marilyn Monroe, a woman whose brilliance dazzled the world, yet whose private life was defined by fragility, isolation, and the relentless demands of a world that adored her. The morning of August 5, 1962, began like any other in Marilyn Monroe's Los Angeles home, yet it would mark the abrupt and heartbreaking conclusion of a life that had captivated the world. At 36, Monroe's extraordinary journey, from Norma Jean Baker, the vulnerable child of foster care, to the dazzling icon of Hollywood, came to an end under circumstances that shocked the globe. Her death was officially ruled a probable suicide due to acute barbiturate intoxication, though the details and surrounding speculation would fuel decades of fascination, rumor, and sorrow. In the days and weeks leading up to her death, Monroe's life was marked by turbulence and stress. She faced the immense pressures of her career, ongoing negotiations with studios, and the relentless media attention that had long accompanied her. Her personal relationships, though meaningful, were strained by distance, expectation, and the challenge of emotional vulnerability. Monroe's ongoing struggles with insomnia, anxiety, and depression were compounded by her dependence on medication, creating a precarious balance that teetered dangerously. Friends and colleagues had noted her fragility in the weeks before her passing. Attempts at social connection, creative collaboration, and even travel were punctuated by moments of withdrawal and emotional distress. While Monroe maintained her public charm and composure in appearances, those closest to her witnessed a woman battling profound loneliness and exhaustion. The image of unassailable glamour belied a private reality of deep psychological pain. The discovery of Monroe's body by her housekeeper and physician marked a moment of disbelief and grief. Emergency responders and investigators confirmed that she had ingested a lethal combination of barbiturates, leading to respiratory failure. The scene, Monroe alone in her bedroom, the remnants of medication nearby, underscored the isolation that had shadowed her life. Though adored by millions, she had confronted her struggles largely in solitude, a private battle waged beneath the dazzling surface of celebrity. Monroe's death ignited a media frenzy unlike any seen before. Newspapers, radio, and television provided non-stop coverage, with speculation about causes, motivations, and potential conspiracies. The world mourned, yet the coverage often blurred respect for the individual with sensationalism, reflecting the very pressures that had complicated Monroe's existence. Despite the frenzy, for many, the tragedy highlighted the human cost of fame, the vulnerability of a woman who had given her life to the demands of public adoration. The immediate aftermath was marked by a mix of shock, grief, and reflection. Fans left flowers, letters, and tokens at her home, memorializing the life of a star who had touched countless lives. Industry colleagues expressed sorrow and admiration, acknowledging both her talent and the challenges she had endured. While the circumstances of her passing invited scrutiny, the overwhelming sentiment was one of profound loss. A life of brilliance cut tragically short, leaving unfinished ambitions, unreconciled relationships, and a void in popular culture. Monroe's passing also sparked debate about the role of fame, media scrutiny, and mental health in her life. Analysts and biographers examined the pressures she faced, from studio expectations and public scrutiny to personal trauma and emotional fragility. Her death became emblematic of the dangers inherent in the Hollywood system, a cautionary tale of a woman whose brilliance was both celebrated and exploited, whose image captivated millions while her humanity struggled unseen. The impact of her death resonated across multiple spheres. In the entertainment industry, it prompted discussions about the welfare of performers, the ethical responsibilities of studios, and the limits of celebrity culture. Socially, it catalyzed reflection on the intersection of beauty, fame, and vulnerability, highlighting how public adoration can mask profound personal struggle. Monroe's death was not merely the loss of a star. It was a cultural moment that exposed the fragility underlying the myth of perfection. Speculation and myth-making began almost immediately. Conspiracy theories, rumors of foul play, and exaggerated narratives about her relationships circulated widely, reflecting both fascination and discomfort with the reality of her vulnerability. While some sought scandal, others sought understanding, attempting to reconcile the image of Marilyn Monroe, the eternal icon of glamour, charm, and allure, with the complex, fragile woman she truly was. The tension between persona and person would remain central to her legacy, underscoring the enduring intrigue and poignancy of her story. Monroe's funeral, held on August 8, 1962, was attended by close family, friends, and select public figures, while thousands of fans gathered outside, mourning a life that had been both intensely public and deeply private. Her gravesite in Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery became a pilgrimage site, a place where admirers could reflect on the contrast between the dazzling image she projected and the hidden struggles she endured. Even in death, Monroe remained an icon, a symbol of beauty, talent, and the human cost of fame. The tragedy of Monroe's end is inseparable from the complexity of her life. Her achievements, brilliance, and cultural influence were accompanied by vulnerability, isolation, and relentless pressure. She lived a life of extraordinary visibility and profound private struggle, navigating an industry and society that often demanded perfection while disregarding human fragility. Her death at 36 crystallized these dynamics, leaving a legacy that is both luminous and heartbreaking. Marilyn Monroe's passing serves as a stark reminder of the interplay between public adoration and private anguish. Her life exemplified the triumphs and tragedies of celebrity, the power of image and influence, the challenges of personal autonomy, and the toll exacted by relentless attention. While the world mourned the loss of an icon, the tragedy lay not only in her untimely death, but in the invisible battles she had waged throughout her life. Battles that reveal the human cost behind the enduring myth of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's death at 36 did not mark the end of her story. Instead, it transformed her into a cultural touchstone whose influence continues to resonate decades later. Her life, career, and tragic end became symbols of the complexities of fame, the fragility of human emotion, and the power of persona. Monroe's legacy is multifaceted, encompassing artistry, fashion, media, and the broader societal conversation about celebrity, femininity, and vulnerability. Her cinematic work remains a testament to her talent and versatility. Films such as Some Like It Hot, The 7-Year Itch, and Bus Stop endure as classics, studied in film schools and celebrated for their humor, charm, and emotional depth. Monroe's ability to infuse seemingly lighthearted roles with nuance and sincerity elevated her performances beyond mere spectacle. She demonstrated comedic timing, dramatic range, and an instinctive understanding of audience engagement, establishing her as more than a symbol of glamour. She was a consummate actress whose artistry continues to inspire performers today. Monroe's influence on fashion and beauty is equally enduring. Her signature platinum blonde hair, red lips, and elegant wardrobe choices became benchmarks of style, influencing trends across decades. Designers, makeup artists, and stylists continue to reference her aesthetic, while her image is repeatedly evoked in advertising, popular culture, and contemporary photography. Monroe's ability to craft an iconic image demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of branding and visual storytelling, merging artistry with strategy in ways that prefigured modern celebrity culture. Beyond aesthetics, Monroe's life sparked cultural conversations about gender, power, and autonomy. Her career and personal struggles highlighted the systemic challenges women faced in Hollywood and society at large. The tension between talent and objectification, autonomy and expectation, visibility and vulnerability. Monroe's efforts to assert creative control through her production company and selective role choices positioned her as a pioneer, challenging the limitations imposed on women in entertainment. Her story continues to inform discussions on equity, agency, and representation in media. Monroe's personal narrative, the tension between public adoration and private vulnerability, has deeply influenced the cultural understanding of fame. Biographers, journalists, filmmakers, and artists have explored her life in books, documentaries, films, and exhibitions, seeking to reconcile the myth of Marilyn Monroe with the reality of Norma Jean Baker. Her story has become a lens through which society examines the human cost of celebrity, the pressures of public scrutiny, and the delicate balance between image and identity. Her enduring influence is evident in countless artists and performers who cite Monroe as inspiration. Actresses, singers, and entertainers have emulated her charisma, style, and ability to command attention, often acknowledging the duality of charm and vulnerability that defined her persona. Monroe's impact transcends generational boundaries, shaping both the aesthetics and attitudes of contemporary popular culture. Her life offers lessons in resilience, self-expression, and the complexities of navigating fame with both brilliance and fragility. Monroe's legacy also includes the continued fascination with her life story, particularly the juxtaposition of glamour and tragedy. Exhibitions, retrospectives, and media portrayals revisit her narrative, emphasizing both her cultural contributions and the personal struggles that defined her final years. This ongoing engagement reflects society's enduring intrigue with the intersection of beauty, talent, vulnerability, and the human consequences of extraordinary visibility. Monroe's story has become emblematic of the broader experience of fame, its allure, its rewards, and its perils. The mythology surrounding Monroe, the blend of image, talent, and tragedy, has created a cultural icon whose resonance extends beyond her era. Photographs, films, and memorabilia continue to circulate globally, reinforcing her place in the collective imagination. Yet the fascination is not solely superficial. It often embodies a deeper empathy for the human challenges she faced. Audiences are drawn to the duality of Monroe, the radiant, confident star, and the fragile, searching woman beneath the surface. This enduring duality ensures that Monroe's story remains compelling, instructive, and profoundly human. Philanthropic and social endeavors further contributed to her legacy, though often overshadowed by her public persona. Monroe engaged in charitable work and supported causes quietly, demonstrating a commitment to using her influence positively. These actions, while less celebrated, reflect the depth of her character and the complexity of a woman who navigated extraordinary visibility with both ambition and compassion. Monroe's cultural relevance persists in contemporary discourse. Her life is referenced in art, music, fashion, literature, and media, continuing to inspire reinterpretation and reflection. Discussions of celebrity, mental health, and societal expectation frequently draw on her story, illustrating both the transformative power of her image and the cautionary lessons embedded in her experiences. Monroe remains a benchmark for evaluating the intersection of fame, agency, and personal vulnerability. Ultimately, Marilyn Monroe's enduring influence is a testament to the interplay of talent, strategy, and human complexity. She created a persona that captivated the world while striving to navigate personal challenges with resilience and intelligence. Her films, fashion, and cultural impact continue to inspire and instruct, offering a multifaceted legacy that transcends generations. Monroe's story, though marked by tragedy, affirms the enduring power of artistry, charisma, and the human spirit. In remembering Monroe, the world honors more than her beauty or celebrity. We recognize her as a pioneer, an artist, and a human being who confronted extraordinary pressures with grace, vulnerability, and ambition. Her life reminds us that behind every icon is a person, complex, striving, and often vulnerable. Marilyn Monroe's legacy endures because it reflects the full spectrum of human experience: brilliance and fragility, triumph and sorrow, visibility and loneliness. She remains, indelibly, an emblem of both the allure and the peril of living in the spotlight.